Why is this strap so expensive? Well, today, hopefully, I can give you an answer to that question, as well as showing you how to go about creating your own. Hi, my name's David, and this is my new channel, Wasting Time. Hopefully, I'm not going to be wasting any of yours, and if you're wondering about the channel name, it's simply a play on words. My other channel is called Saving Time, where I restore old vintage watches and hopefully save them from the confines of the dustbin. So this channel is simply me trying to be clever with the name. I really hope it doesn't turn out to be prophetic, but I'll have to let you decide on that one. Now, this video is going to be a deep dive on high-end straps and all that entails. Probably too deep a dive for any right-thinking person. But if you are the sort of person that finds yourself extolling the virtues of Breguet overcoil hairsprings at parties, you'll probably find it very interesting, because I do. Now, as this is the first video on my new channel, I'd like to thank you all for giving it a go, giving me a chance here. Do let me know what you think down below. So the first thing, of course, as you can see me cut into this material here that's going to have a big effect on the price of your strap, is the material used. Now, I'll cover the materials I'm using for this strap in a moment. The second thing for me that goes into the pricing is the amount of hand crafting that goes into it. Now, there are much faster ways of producing a strap than the ones I use, but for me, luxury comes from the skill and time somebody puts into creating something. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not adverse to mass production. I'm not one of these people that thinks all new things are bad. I like mass manufacturing. I don't want to buy artisanally crafted toilet paper for $5 a sheet. But when it comes to watches and other luxury goods, the more handcrafted it is, the more I'm personally going to value it. Now, my Casio G-Shock keeps better time than a George Daniels anniversary, but I certainly know which one has more value in my eyes. Now, I'd also say I don't really script these videos, so apologies if I go down off the beaten path. Do feel free to ask me anything I don't cover. So the material in use here is a top grain pull-up leather. Pull-up just refers to the manufacturing technique of stuffing the leather with oil and wax, or sometimes both. This gives you a lovely finish that changes colour when the leather bends. If you're not very familiar with the different types of leather, different finishing techniques, if you see a leather you think looks expensive, there's a good chance that it's a pull-up leather. Now, if you see me drawing around this template here, training to become a watchmaker has certainly given me a new appreciation for the accuracy of all things, or in all things. There is one other problem we have. This leather is too thick, so I'm going to show you how to get around that. Now, I sign the straps not out of any pretentious reasons. Well, not entirely out of pretentious reasons, but I design everything, as you'll see as we go through, to be repairable. And the backing on leather straps and the stitching will normally always fail before the top leather if the top leather is a high quality leather, and a leather like this will patina over time. People get very attached to it, so I like to repair it for them if that stitching ever frays. It's not common if you use a high quality linen or a very high quality polyester thread, but it does happen. So I like to design all of these things so they can be sent back to me and fixed, and when that happens, I want to know when I first made it. As I mentioned, this leather is too thick, so it's going to have to be skived down. Now, this takes quite a bit of skill and a bit of practice before you'll be able to get it right. Now, I will mention one thing here that I think a lot of leather channels don't mention, is that a waxed pull-up leather like this is easy to skive in comparison with a lot of other leathers. So if you are giving this a go yourself, and your leather is just not behaving like this, it could well be the leather. Don't give up. It is difficult, but the leather does make a difference. Some skives quite easily and some just does not. It's a giant pain. This one is not particularly simple, but it's definitely not difficult. The one thing I would point out is make sure your knife is absolutely razor sharp. And if you're wondering about the knife I use, you don't want this one. This one was $3. I made the mistake on my other channel of making a video saying you can get started with leatherwork for a couple of bucks. You don't need expensive tools, and somebody challenged me to use the cheap tools I was recommending. So for the knife, I spent way too long sharpening it, grinding it, and reprofiling it. Now it's actually quite good. I would, however, recommend that you just spend 20 bucks on a decent knife. This is not the one you want, not unless you want a couple of hours in the workshop regrinding the thing. So this skives, as I said, it's not terribly difficult. It does take a bit of practice and a bit of skill, and this will give us a nice thin edge to our strap. Now I'm going to sanity check with a template. People have asked me before if they can have my templates. The answer is yes. I haven't had time to sort out all the files yet, but at some point on the Wasting Time channel I will post links to all the templates so you can have my templates, as well as refer back to this video for all the steps I take. Should make it a lot easier for you to get started if it's something you're interested in having a go with. Now, I would encourage you to give this a go. It's a great hobby. It doesn't take a lot to get started. Obviously, I think I'll be preaching to the choir when I say the better your tools are, the more easier time you're going to have. But look, this is a $3 knife here on display, AliExpress job, and it works just fine. I think for future videos, if I do this again, I will just bust out my actual knife so I don't have to do this. But this video I'm going to dedicate to the gentleman that told me that you could not do this with cheaper tools. Here you go, sir. You most certainly can. Now, you should end up after your skiving with nice slices. You don't want, bits everywhere. Sometimes it's unavoidable with more difficult leathers, but if you can, you want to get that off in one nice slice. I've also used tape to secure this strap to my surface here. I'm using a marble cutting stone just so I don't cut into anything as I come out the back of the strap with a knife. Now, the tape will damage pull-up leather, but in this instance we are going to be cutting off the damaged portion, but you should always check your leather. If it does damage your leather and you're cutting it or skiving it somewhere that won't be cut off or would be visible, you might want to try a piece of rubber. I've enjoyed a great deal of success with a piece of rubber holding the leather in place while you skive it. It's just easier than trying to force hold it down with your hand, because you are putting quite a bit of pressure on there. I have ended up with elbow injuries in the past, just from working too much. Well, I've been putting too much pressure down with one arm, and yeah, the tape makes things a lot easier. But again, be aware you can damage your leather with it. In this case, this is why I'm not using it here, because I'm skiving off the part of the strap where the spring bars would go. This wants to be nice and thin so your strap does not rub up against the watch case. You don't want that, especially if you have sort of a gold plated case. You don't want the strap rubbing against the gold plating. Easy way to take your gold plating off and make your watch look not excellent. So you can see I didn't use any tape for that, because where that would be taped, the leather would be visible, and we can't have people seeing that. So that's a little more difficult. Now, I want this perfect, so after I have done the skiving cut, I will do a little scraping just to make sure everything is even. Now, I've left this video purposefully long as well, so I apologize for that, but I really wanted to give a good indication of what actually goes into this. There are so many things nowadays that say handmade, and it literally means that somebody has, well, picked them up by hand and walked them over to a machine and dumped them in. When I say handmade, I mean handmade. It's hand cut, it's hand shaped, it's hand skived, it's hand sewn. A lot of handwork that goes into this. So I'm also going to cut the bottom of this strap very thin. This should end up about 1.5 millimeters thick with the backing. And the reason for that is this strap in particular will go into an Omega Deployant clasp. Now, the Omega Deployant requires a strap to be no thicker than, I think, 2.4 millimeters at the end, or it won't fit into the deployant. And also, I like a thinner strap, especially when it comes to vintage watches. Now, I will be padding this one, but I'll only be padding the top of it. So where it bends down under your wrist, it will remain very thin, very comfortable. I'm also going to use lamb's leather for the backing. Now, lamb is a nice material for strap backing. I'll use zermet calf a lot of the time too. Both of these materials are waterproof and hypoallergenic. So they work very well as strap liner. They're also soft and supple and comfortable to wear. Now, waterproof might have been a bit much there. Water resistant, I guess, would be a better term, but they're certainly better than a piece of raw leather on the back of your wrist. Now, I'm going to cut down ultra thin at the end, just so when it folds over, there's no bump where the lamb's leather, where the liner, which in this case is lamb's leather, meets the back leather. You want that to be nice and thin. Again, you don't want a bump on your strap. After everything's been skived, I like to do a quick sanity check by folding that over. I can check that the spring bar holes are nice and thin, again, so the strap doesn't bump into the top of the wrist. I'm not sure if I'm going to show you how thick that is, but I will be showing everything at the end. Now, I need to cut the padding here, and I'm going to use just a piece. I think this is Epsom leather. It's a nice enough leather. It's just very soft. I think I had it left over from making a handbag, so I'm going to use it for the padding. Now, the padding will have to be cut again to an exact shape. As I mentioned, I've gained a greater appreciation for accuracy, especially in strap making. You do not want wonky bits of padding, different size padding that pushes the stitching out too far. So I design everything in CAD and then template it up with my 3D printer. And as I mentioned, I'll try and make those files available. I am busy at the moment, way too busy in fact. So as soon as I can get round to sorting all those files out into some semblance of order, I will bung them here on the channel. I'll probably do a video, and you can all download them. I have no particular attachment to them. I'll be happy for you to use them. So cut a couple of pieces of padding. This will also have to be skived thin at one end because you do not want a sudden bump coming at the end of your padding. But this is what we're using. It doesn't really matter. You can use pretty much any leather, whether you want a soft padding or a hard padding is entirely up to you. I tend to go for soft most of the time. Now, this, what looks like a sheet of paper, is actually not. It's called veladon. It's a reinforcement material for leather. This will stop the strap stretching. It will also stop the holes coming stretched out of shape. So if you need to put holes in for a buckle or a deployant, this will stop those holes stretching into oblongs. It'll also stop the strap becoming like a rubber band, because if you have a thinner strap, especially with a material like lamb's leather, which itself tends to be a little stretchy, this can be a bit too much. So veladon is an expensive reinforcement material, but it's worth every penny in my opinion. I'll link the place where I buy it down below. It's not a sponsored thing or an affiliate link. It's just quite hard to find, and for straps it's perfect because it's so thin. It's a little like Kevlar. It's like a very tightly woven fibre. It will not stretch at all. I cannot stretch this by putting it between my hands and giving it a tug. It doesn't stretch. Fantastic stuff. It's 0.2 millimeters thick. I think it adds almost nothing to the thickness of your end strap. So while there are cheaper reinforcements, this in my opinion, it does the job perfectly. Well worth buying. And if you're making a strap, it's not that much extra cost. I mean, if you're making a suitcase, it's going to cost you a fortune, but for a strap, it's not too bad. Sanity check once again with the templates. For reinforcement, I do not want that reinforcement to poke out of the sides of the strap because it makes the edges more difficult to finish. It's still possible, but As much as I do love a bit of handwork here, I don't actually like doing more work than I need to do. So I'm going to show the glue here for gluing in the reinforcement. I use a specially formulated low-tack glue, so if the strap ever comes back from repair, I can get the leather off, the top leather, this leather here, off without damaging it, and reback it and restitch it. Like I say, people get attached to leather that patinas. I certainly do. My clients do, and I'm happy to repair stuff just because, like, my ethos is stuff should last. I don't like this disposable throwaway culture we find ourselves in so much. Like I say, don't have a problem with newer items or mass production or anything like that. I'm not one of these people that think the 1950s was better. It's just, if I'm making something, I like to make it to the best of my abilities, and I'd like it to be around for a long time if I can achieve that. So the veladon is going in here. I'll probably skip any more gluing shots because I think it's a little uninteresting. So if you see me, push two things together, rest assured there is glue on it. I'll tell you if there's not, but things like the padding have to be glued on. The lamb's leather backing has to be glued on. Now, if you're going to create a strap for the first time, you might want to try and find some Zermatt calf or some calf skin instead of lamb's leather. Lamb's leather is really nice. It's available in a ton of colors, which is cool, and it's supple, it's comfortable, it's hypoallergenic, it's water resistant. It's got just about everything you would need in a backing leather, except it's a pain in the backside to work with. It's like rubber band levels of stretchiness. It's very difficult to skive, or at least it can be. Cast leather is easier to work with, in my opinion. But anyway, here's our lamb's leather. I think this one is French, just to add that extra note of pretension once again. And as you can see, I've already used this on a few straps I've made. I love the red color. Nobody will ever see it but you, of course, if it's your strap. But you can kind of peek at it when your wrist is at the right angle. There's that little flash of red. I think it adds a nice touch to a otherwise very traditional strap. Now here's the lamb's leather being cut. It's going to look quite easy here when I do it, but this took me a while to learn on lamb's leather. It is very delicate and very easy to get that wrong because it stretches so much. If you use too much pressure, you'll end up with a very ragged edge, and you are going to see this edge. This is going to be on top. So this edge is important. It needs to be straight. If it looks crooked or ragged, you are, well, you're going to look a bit silly as that goes in. Now, once I've skived lamb, like I say, because it is such a pain, I'll put it on another piece of leather and just use a lot of pressure here just to take those straggly ends off. Again, just because you're going to see it. And this is, well, part of watchmaking. The strap is part of a watch. It's part of the package. So it has to be sort of perfect, or as perfect as you can make it. In my opinion, watch straps, even though they look simple, if you've never seen one made, you might think it's a couple of pieces of leather stuck together. Watch straps are more difficult, in my opinion, than things like wallets, just because they have to be spot on. If you need an 18mm watch strap, you need that to be 18mm, not 17.6 or 18.5. So the level of precision with straps is quite high, or needs to be quite high. Your customer is gonna, or yourself if you're not making for somebody else, but the person who's receiving the strap, even you, probably loves your watch if you're going to all this trouble. Probably, like me, are somebody who's constantly looking for any small scratch, blemish or imperfection in their watch. And if you're looking that closely and the strap is staring you in the eye and it's a little bit crooked or bent, this is really going to ruin your day. So watch straps do require, in my opinion, a high level of precision. Now, this tool here, if you were wondering, is called a saddler's file. They're not expensive and they're great. You can use sandpaper to do this. The saddler's file just files the top surface of the leather here, which is important for the glue to stick to it. It's just a little time saver rather than busting out the sandpaper every time. or equivalent. I really like these things. They're a couple of bucks. Get one if you want to do some leather work. You can actually see on the strap there, and again, I'm filing the padding because that also has a surface on it that the glue will have trouble sticking to. But if you look at the strap there on the left hand side, you can see a stripe going down it where the tape was. Now in our case this doesn't matter at all because we're going to be cutting that off, but you know, as I said, do watch out for sticking leather down with tape if it's going to be in a visible place. A lot of leather, this Epson, you know what, I've gone blank. As I said, I don't I don't script these videos, excuse me, having a bit of a senior moment. I don't really script these videos, but yeah, the leather I'm using for padding there would stick to the tape just fine. You can always test a small bit. Now, an important thing when you do padding on a strap like this, you want to push down from the top, because especially when you're putting the backing on, you always want to glue and then push down from the top. Otherwise you're going to end up padding the back, and it's just not going to look right. You're just going to end up with a bump at the back of your strap as opposed to in the front. Now I'm using a bone here to accentuate the padding. In this case it's not going to matter because for this design the padding will push to the edges of the strap. There is other ways to do it where your padding is more pronounced and it doesn't push all the way to the edge, but the reason I'm really pushing this down with the bone, even though you're not going to see this in the end result, is because when I stick the backing on, the backing will then be stuck on flat and the padding will pad upwards, if that makes sense. So you see the padding at the top of the strap, not at the bottom of the strap where it's pressed against your wrist and would be, you know, entirely pointless. It would then just look like your strap was a bit fat at the top, probably not the look you're going for at all. Now you might notice some differences with this strap because, as I mentioned, I think it is for an Omega Deployant, so both sides are a very similar length rather than the traditional one long side, one short side. So you can still apply all of these techniques, of course, to making a standard strap. And if people like this, again, do let me know. This is new for me, the channel, so some feedback would be gratefully received. I'll do the creation of a standard strap, but more buckle type strap. But for me, pull-up leather, because of the color-changing nature of it and how easily it marks and scratches, is better on a deployant clasp. Now, that's just what I think about it. Lots of people like pull-up leather on a buckle. For me, I'm always going to put it on a deployant, and I'm going to recommend it goes on a deployant. There are many on the market that you could use, but, you know, that's just my personal feeling on it. Your mileage may of course vary. So our lamb's leather goes on the back here, wonderful material, and again put it on lightly and then push down from the top side of the strap, otherwise you'll end up with your padding coming through the back, probably not the look that you are intending. Now, as I'm sure someone is going to ask me what the watch on my wrist is, it's a Buren Inca Star. It's an incredibly rare vintage watch from the company that Hamilton bought during their move to Switzerland. I cover the history of it on my other channel, as well as a complete teardown and restoration of it. The strap is blue snakeskin, for those of you wondering. Kind of difficult material to work with and kind of delicate, but on a watch like this I thought it suited. Right, so strap, the back of the strap, I think this is the bottom half. I'm not actually sure, I've lost track now because again I am not, yeah, this is the long half of the strap, which on an Omega is generally only about 1 centimeter longer than the other bit, and the padding again pushed down from the top. Now I've made the liner a little bit long, but that's no problem. I'll just whop that off with the knife as soon as I've got that pushed down. Now I'm going to use templates to cut round. Now I've done this a little differently in the past. When I come to cut the very bottom of the strap where the point is, I'm going to cut round in one motion. If you are doing a more rounded cut, you can cut round in many slices, and I will demonstrate that in a video at some point. But if your strap is super pointy like this, you can actually get away with cutting in one stroke, which is a lot easier. Now, talking of strokes and pressure, there is no real need, I see a lot of people trying this, to cut through it all in one go. What will end up happening is you'll put a lot of pressure on the knife and you'll bend the leather as you're cutting, which, if you're making a bigger object like a bag, isn't going to be so important. You'll probably get away with it. But if you're making a strap, those very, very small motions you're making when you bend the leather by using too much pressure can end up turning your 18mm strap into an 18.6mm strap, which is then going to require a lot of sanding and a lot of fiddling about with to get it right. Or even worse, you can bend the leather the other way, you can pull it slightly and end up with a 17.5mm strap, which is just no good. That one will either have to be cut down to 17mm and used in a different project, or simply chucked in the bin, depending on how annoyed you are with yourself at that point. Been there and done that. But we're going to get this strap fully cut. Now, this strap, because it's on a deployant, doesn't require strap keepers, so these cuts again are a little bit more simple. I am not going to be using a official Omega Deployant. I'm going to be using one of the non-OEM ones you can buy at watch suppliers like Cousins. They're a nice high quality stainless steel version of the Omega one. I don't buy new watches, so I have no need for a $700 Omega Deployant for modern watches, but I do have clients that do, so I tend to keep one, or at least a version of one of each of the deployant clasps. The one I'm actually wearing on my wrist right now is a Cartier. So after the strap has been cut, quick sanity check. Now we're going for 18mm. I don't want that to be 18mm as I squeeze it. I want it to be 18mm loosely held. 15.5mm on the other end is also correct. So as you can see, we're bang on 18 with it being a little ever so tiny bit loose. I do not want that strap to rub up against the lugs, so it should be 18 with a little bit of swing to it. If you've got it too big, you can always sand it down. Nothing wrong with that. We will be sanding this a little bit anyhow, and the edges will need to be painted. I'm going to now use a creaser. This one is on the end of a temperature controlled soldering iron, and this will just put a little crease, a little fold down the edges of our leather to make everything look nicer. Now normally I do this more towards the end, but as I punch the holes, I want to be able to show you with some sort of visual index how accurate we get the hole punching, because it's important. Now as you can see, the line we made with the bone tool earlier is now being completely taken away because it's in the same place as the creasing tool. This is perfect. This is exactly what we want to happen. We wanted this strap padded edge to edge. It is possible to make the padding a little thinner. That will give you a different effect entirely. Again, I might make one of those. It depends on how the feedback of this video goes. I really am going to be relying on you chaps here to let me know the sort of thing you want to see. The next video I was planning on doing was a breakdown of a watch cleaning machine, a vintage one from 1960, a repair and maybe a bit of a modernization. So as I say, the Wasting Time channel might get a bit eclectic. So if there is anything you want to see, you have any wild, wacky, off the wall ideas for me, I'm probably not going to take up gaming. But other than that, just let me know, and if it's within the realm of watches and restoration and I can do it, I might give it a shot. So the creasing tool, I would recommend. There are specific leather ones, but genuinely I've tried those, and I've tried a temperature controlled soldering iron. They both do exactly the same job, and I would say in this case, for me, I like the temperature controlled soldering iron just because I can use it for soldering too. But if you have no intention of ever doing any electronics work, you might want to look into an actual leather one. Again, there's not really that much difference. Do not, or I'm not your mum, so you can do it if you want, but don't try a non-temperature controlled iron. It'll probably be too hot and you'll just end up burning your leather. There is also manual ones that you can just heat over a flame. Those work perfectly acceptably too. And if you're only ever going to make a few straps, I'd probably recommend one of the manual ones. They're cheap enough and they do the job. But as we get that crease in, we actually start to look a little bit more like a strap. Still not looking like the one I showed you at the start, but this video is certainly not going to be a bait and switch. So we are going to be antiquing this in a little while. Now, the buckle end of the strap, or the deployant end of the strap, was 15.8 there. I actually want that a little bit thinner than 16 millimeters. Because of the nature of the design of the deployant, I like to get that just a little bit undersized. Now I'm using a press to punch the holes. You can do this by hand. I would point out though that it's a lot more difficult to do it by hand when you have padding, because the punch will want to slip off the sides. So you can do it by hand. I do it by hand all the time. I just happen to have the punch set up here, so I'm using it. The punch set up in a press, so I'm using it. But it is more difficult when you have padding. So if you've never done the punching before, try it on a strap that you didn't pad first. You'll probably thank me later for that one. So we're using a 4mm punch here. Actually, I think it's 3.8 millimeters, which will give us quite big stitching, but pull-up leather tends to look a little rustic, which is one of the reasons people like it. It's one of the reasons I like it. It might not suit the dressiest of dress watches. Well, I actually do like it on dress watches too. Your mileage, of course, might vary, but it's kind of a rustic looking thing, and so I like to use bigger stitches. I go all the way down to 2.7 millimeter, which might not sound like it's that much different in size, but trust me, if you did a side-by-side comparison, the 2.7 millimeter looks tiny compared to the 3.7 millimeter, 3.8 in this case. Now I use shims to determine the distance of the holes away from the side of the leather, and you see me change shims there because when you are punching into the leather with padding, the punch, even in this configuration, will push out a bit. So I use a 1.2 millimeter shim at the top of the strap and a 1 millimeter shim at the bottom. Yes, it's kind of that accurate to get a perfectly straight line of holes. Good stitching cannot be done without good punched holes. So if your stitching is looking terrible, if you're giving this a go, check your holes first, because they really are everything. You cannot have a good stitch without good holes. It doesn't matter how good your stitching technique is, it's going to look terrible. I know from very long and bitter experience of learning to do this. This looks quite simple. Hopefully I'm not making it look too simple, but there is nothing I can do about this. I've done it for quite a while now. I'm sort of on autopilot in the background here, I will be honest. And it looks easy. It's one of those things that looks easy, and then you try and do it and you'll find that your holes are all over the place. If you want to see how good someone's punching is and how good their stitching is, ask to look at the back of their leatherwork, because that's where the errors will really start to show up. On a watch strap, you can't really hide it, because when you take your watch off, you'll be staring right at the back of the strap. And if you have, stitching that's going in a snaky line, you will notice it. It will annoy you. Certainly if you're anything like me. It took me, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 straps before I got one I was even remotely happy with. Now, it could be argued that I'm a very slow learner and you'll do it a lot quicker than that. I guess I'm just trying to throw in a word of encouragement. If you've tried this before and it looked like a dog's breakfast, don't worry about it. It did for me too. It took me a significant number of tries to get something that was accurate and something that I put on and went, hey, this doesn't look terrible from 10 feet away. So I'm going to antique this strap. Now, by this I mean I'm going to gradiate it so it's darker around the edge, give it an antique leather look. I'm going to do this with wax. This is my own mixture of beeswax and olive oil. I can't remember if I use anything else in this one, but beeswax and olive oil will certainly do it for you. We're going to add the wax, and then we're going to heat it up to stuff more wax into the leather. This will darken the leather in these specific places. Now you can do this with dye too. Yeah, same thing, just use dye and not wax, but I find the wax more subtle and will give a nicer gradient. It's not so obvious. Now at the moment, because the wax is wet and the leather is wet, it looks very dark and very obvious, and honestly not terribly nice. So again, if you give this a go and you get to this point and you're just screaming at yourself that you've totally ruined it and it looks awful, give it a minute. It'll dry, and I promise you it will start to come good. Now I did this several times. This again is one of those things that's definitely more art than science. You can darken it up as much as you want, you can bring it in from the edge as much as you want. It's just personal preference. This is how I like to do mine. I like a dark tip on mine, and then a subtle shade along the edges. And when I've done this, I'll show you what it looks like when it's dry. It's going to be a lot more subtle, because when I watched the footage on this, I almost had a heart attack at how dark it was, especially after you go ahead and heat it. But it is going to fade. And I heated it there with a hot air gun set to 100 degrees C. Sorry, I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. It's not that hot. Basically, you could probably do it with a hairdryer set on max heat. I don't know, I've never tried it, but it might be hot enough. You could certainly do it with a hot air gun. Of course, I use a solder rework station because it happens to be part of the same thing that my edge creaser is attached to, which is one of the reasons I like it. Now, you can't really get this wrong. You are just trying to give it an antique look. Well, I guess you could get it wrong. You could slap it all over the strap and then there'd be no differentiator. But really, this is just artistic, however you like it. I like mine darker at the bottom and the sides. And again, I am going to do this several times and really persevere with this. If you're trying it, it can look hideous when you're at this point of the process. This is not looking terribly attractive right now, but you saw I brought in the other strap for comparison. It looks completely different when it's dry than it does when it's wet, which can make this, a little tricky. But I'm going to persevere here, and I'll probably throw the stitching in next, and then I might even do some darkening over the stitching. Because with this technique, you're not using dye, which means you can obviously go right over your stitching. It won't change the colour of your stitching whatsoever, which is why I like this, and I also like it because it's subtle. And I know I keep saying that, and it does not look at all subtle at the moment, but it will, hopefully. By the end of the video, I'm going to come off looking a bit stupid. Right, so get some stitching in this, and before I do that, I'll need to throw in a hole for the quick release spring bar. Now, the reason I throw in the hole here is because I like to stitch right up to the top of the strap to keep the strap keeper holes nice and tight, and sometimes when you do that, you can end up cutting the stitches with this tool that puts the hole for the quick release spring bar. If I'd have done this after I'd stitched it, I'd have just cut through all my stitches, and then there would be tears before bedtime, because there's no way to fix that. You have to pull the stitches out and do it again. In fact, if I put a needle through, you see I definitely would have lopped my stitches in half there. So it's fine to stitch through the quick release spring bar hole. Patek Philippe do it, and if they do it, it's certainly good enough for me. So I like to get that done first. Now, I got hideous footage of the stitching here. I don't know why there's supposed to be two cameras doing this. There is most certainly not two cameras doing this. I've just got this one, so I'm not going to show it all. Again, this is a new venture for me, so maybe this is enough for you all. Maybe you want a full lesson on saddle stitching and different types of thread. Again, I guess if you're still watching, if you're still with me, I guess I could probably talk about thread for an hour. In fact, I can easily talk about thread for an hour. I'm not terribly excited at parties, but if you want to know the difference between linen and handmade and hand waxed polyester, I'm probably your guy. Normally in the corner of the room talking to the pot plant there at most parties. But there you go, our stitching is done. Sorry about the lack of footage, but as I said, first video here on the channel, so cut me some slack, please. And as you can see, that antiquing drying after it's been heated, and now it's having time to blend in. It looks beautiful in my opinion. That will most certainly get more subtle over time, and we can even give a burnish to this strap when that's all dry, and then the strap will be much shinier than this. It will look superb. I asked Mrs. Saving Time what she thought of this effect, and she said she thought it looked expensive, and I kind of agree. It kind of does. It's a beautiful leather, beautiful lamb, and that antiquing just knocks it up a notch. It's not in your face, in my opinion. It's not too obvious. It's really pretty. So in order to get this thing to look nice, we will have to finish the edges, and this is another reason why straps can become expensive. I sort of strayed off topic, but I did warn you at the start of the video I might do that. But yeah, the edge finishing is going to take as long as the rest of the strap combined, basically. So I'm not going to show all of it. In fact, hopefully I'm going to speed this footage up now. Otherwise, I'm going to have to talk for another 20 minutes, which genuinely is not a problem for me. The reason I don't script these is I find it quite easy to talk. You should put a couple of pints in me. You never get me to shut up. But anyway, yeah, this is a time-consuming process. Your edges need to be sanded as flat as possible. I'm using a 400 grit here because I don't want them smooth. Like I genuinely, at this point in the process, do not want them smooth like glass, because then the edge paint won't stick. So 400 is about rough enough for me. It's smooth enough that the paint will stick without, being all bibbly bobbly, but it's not so smooth that the paint will just slide off like I was painting a piece of glass. Now, when I've done the paint, I'm going to need to come in and sand it all off again. Paint doesn't really fill in gaps, and you want your edges to reveal what looks like a solid edge, not two pieces of leather stuck together. So the paint's not going to fill the gaps for you. Paint doesn't fill, it just conforms to whatever surface you put it on. So the more accurate your cut is, the easier this is going to be. It's still going to be a pain in the backside if you want it perfect. So it's sanding and then painting and then sanding and then painting and then sanding and then painting until you get the effect that you are looking for. It's just a lot of work. So if you were to look at a strap online that is cheaper than you might think it would be, if you look at the edges and the edges are just burnished, which can be very nice, I'm not knocking it, or the edges are unfinished, which again can be very nice, that's a lot less work for the strap maker than it is to do a painted edge like this. And by the way, these marker pens you can buy on Amazon. I don't have any affiliate links or whatnot. I'm not going to link anything. They are just called refillable paint pens, I think. You pick them up like $5 for $10 or something. They're cheap. They're really handy, especially if you do as much work as I do on leather. I've got them in all different colors. I use leather edge paint, of course. I fill these up myself, so they don't come with the paint. And I'll generally finish off the last coat of paint that I do. I'll generally finish off with just a needle or something with the paint dipped in. An owl normally I use, which is like a long needle on a stick for those of you who aren't aware. This is the French method of finishing, but just to get the first paint on that I'm going to sand off anyway, well 90% of it, these paint pens are a godsend. It saves you getting paint everywhere. You really can get a bit messy doing this, and you slip, you get paint over the backing. It can be tricky. So the paint pens, definitely recommended. Give them a go. Now, when I've painted and left it to dry for a little while, which probably was cut in the video, I'm going to use the flat end of my creaser that's been heated up to about 120 degrees centigrade in this case, just to dry and smooth out this paint. Now, some paint can be dried and smoothed, some paint you cannot, and pretty much the only way I've found to tell is to try it. If your paint seems to be really sticking to your hot iron, this could be an indicator that the temperature is too high. At this point, the paint will become rough and you'll really feel it drag. You know, it'll be tough work getting that across. You want that to slide across real smoothly. Some paint just can't be smooth though, so regardless of the temperature, it just won't have it. And here you can see what I mean. I'm going to sand this almost back down to the bare leather, so don't be afraid to take too much off. You know, you can see, try and get it on the camera as best as I can, and this is a new camera for me as well, so that's why I'm having some problems with the focus here, besides the fact that I'm a bit of a muppet with this kind of thing. New camera, so all sorts of excuses coming out here for this first video. But anyway, you can see hopefully that I'm taking that back down almost to the bare leather. So there is fillers you can buy and undercoats and treatments, but this I wanted to keep as simple as possible. I can even do a video if you guys fancy it on the fillers I use, the undercoats, and how to get the edge better than this one, because this one's going to be good. I'm sure for a lot of people it would be perfect. There is ways to get it better, however, this one's certainly going to be good enough to pass muster. And the fillers and whatnot that I use are generally business to business sale. They're a pain in the backside to get, and they're very expensive, which is the reason I'm leaving them out of the video. But I can certainly bring them out, bust them out, and give you guys all the demonstration of how much easier it is with fillers, or not in some cases. Again, I'm used to talking about this stuff in very great detail. I'm sure quite boring to a lot of people. Right, so after I have got one round of edge paint on, I want to cut a chamfer along the strap. Now this is, I believe, 0.6 millimeter chamfer. It'll make the strap appear thinner. I'm still going to edge paint after this. I'm not sure if I'll show it, but I like to get that first coat on, and one of the reasons is as you sand this back, the leather at the edges of the strap can turn up slightly and look unattractive. So I like to cut that back at this point, as the sanding I'll be doing from now on will be very light sanding of the paint. So this will allow just as it's very subtle. It might not even appear that much on video, but in person, it just gives a nice rounded feel to the strap. It catches the light a little differently. I don't know how well that is going to appear on camera. And I'll do the back as well, the back of the lambskin. But there you can see I've got a couple more coats of paint on this now, and it's really beginning to look like one piece of leather as opposed to two. I like to have my stuff so it looks like one piece, and to get that a bit shiny and a bit smoother, I'm going to use some isopropyl on a bit of tissue here. This will rub the paint off. Now it will also make it shiny and smoother, but if you haven't got enough coats on there, or your last coat wasn't thick enough, you'll end up rubbing your paint off and you'll be back to square one. Well, not quite, but you'll definitely be doing a new coat of paint. So this is a technique that you don't need to do, a step that you don't need to do. It will make it look slightly better. 99% of people wouldn't notice. I do it anyway, because, you know, I'm here to try and make the best that I can make. But if it's your first time making a strap and you've got the edge and you think it looks quite nice, you might want to skip the isopropyl step, because it can be a little bit heartbreaking when you've got, you know, especially your first couple and they're looking good, and then you go and wipe your own paint off. Yep, that will ruin your day. I know all this because I've been in this situation. So, right, so this is pure beeswax. I think this was from a beeswax candle. I can't remember. I've had it for ages and ages and ages, but it's 100% pure beeswax. and obviously that is rock hard, so I'm having to work it quite hard into our painted edge. The edge paints I use are high quality, so I'm not worried about rubbing them off, but it's a bit of a workout, and it's going to look hideous because the beeswax is rock hard, so it's just going to look like, you know, lumps of yuck. But this is where my heated tool comes in again, so I'm going to use that to melt the beeswax, and this will create a protective coating over that edge, which will help, you know, not have the edge chip or damage or, you know, get discolored or whatnot. Now I would say as well that this edge paint I'm using, it's been applied extremely thinly. Well, one of the things I see people try is to go, you know, a big huge thick coat of edge paint, so it looks almost like a big rubber bumper, and then they'll sand it just a little bit, and then they'll put on another big huge thick coat of edge paint, trying to get that really smooth look. Well, you can do this, and it might look smooth, but I can almost guarantee a day or two later it's going to peel right off. Your edge paint should actually be really thin. It shouldn't be adding any thickness at all to your strap. Now this tool I'm using here to open up the spring bar holes is actually red hot. I heat it in an alcohol flame or a blowtorch. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to be red hot. I mean, you're not trying to melt aluminium, but it should be hot enough to melt the edge paint and push it through and give you a really nice circular round hole. So, you know, when you ship your strap or when you finish it, it doesn't look like you've got a big flat bit where your spring bars should go through. If you're just making for yourself, you can probably skip that, because once you shove the spring bar through, it will be a nice round hole. But if you are giving this to somebody else, and they get it out and they look at it, you really want that nice round hole at the end. You don't really want a big flat spot at the end of your strap. So this one certainly could have been refined a little bit more. It was made just for the sake of this video, and I genuinely hope you enjoyed having a look at this full process, and I haven't rambled on too much. Like I say, you give me a pint, you can't shut me up. I'm going to put this on a watch for you so you can see what that would look like. There is that Omega Deployant. This strap is beautiful. I do not think that my video skills are good enough to do this one justice whatsoever. If you get the opportunity to try and make one of these, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It is much more difficult than I've made it look, but it is very rewarding, and yeah, let's face it, these things are expensive. Getting a custom-made bespoke strap with this type of material is going to cost you quite a bit of money. So if you can do it yourself, give it a go. It's a lot of fun. And it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. As the watch on my wrist is not, that is my name, D. James. I'm David. It was beautiful to chat with you all. That dial is certainly not perfect, but this strap is definitely the right size. Thank you all for joining me. It's been lovely to chat with you. Do leave me a comment and whatnot down below. Let me know how I did with this first video. Let me know if there's anything else you want to see. Maybe you need some information on stitching, or you want to see something completely off the wall. Let me know. Thank you very much for watching.